One easy way to add some polish to your Flash applications is to add a simple graphic effect, such as a drop shadow behind a photo like I've done here, to give it more of a 3D look, or to add a glow or bevel around a button or label to show that it's active. In ActionScript 3.0, there are 10 filters that you can apply to any display object or to a bitmap data instance. These range from basic filters such as drop shadows, glows, filters, to complex filters for creating various effects such as the displacement map filter or the convolution filter. So let me now review some of the scripting for filtering your display objects. Before I start, let me review some common filtering tasks. These include creating a filter, applying a filter to a display object, removing a filter from a display object, applying a filter to the image data in a bitmap data instance, removing filters from an object, or creating various filter effects, including glow, blur, drop shadow, sharpness, displacement, edge detection, embossing, and others. Filters allow you to apply a range of effects to bitmap and display objects, ranging again from drop shadows to bevels and blurs. Each of these filters is defined as a class, so applying filters involves creating instances of filter objects, which is really no different from constructing any other type of object in ActionScript. Once you've created an instance of a filter object, it can easily be applied to a display object by using the object's filters property, or in the case of a bitmap data object, you would use the apply filter method. Here's a sample script creating a drop shadow filter. To create a new filter, you just create a new filter object by simply calling the constructor method of your selected filter class. For example, here, to create the drop shadow filter object, I would use the code here in the first line, variable drop shadow, colon drop shadow filter equals new, drop shadow filter, and then there are the parameters of the drop shadow, how far it's going to be displaced, the color of the shadow, and other properties that you can set of your drop shadow. So as you can see here, the drop shadow filter constructor, like all filter class constructors, accepts several optional parameters that can be used to customize the appearance of the filter effect. Let's go ahead and demonstrate the construction here of this drop shadow filter to my sphere object there. Actually, let me put that back up there and give you a short description of how these filters work. Now, display object filtering works by caching a copy of the original object as a transparent bitmap. Once a filter has been applied to a display object, the Flash player caches the object as a bitmap for as long as the object has a valid filter list. This source bitmap is then used as the original image for all subsequently applied filter effects. Each display object usually contains two bitmaps, one with the original unfiltered source display object and another for the final image after filtering. This final image is used when rendering. As long as the display object does not change, the final image will not need to be updated. Now, once you've constructed a filter object like I have here in the first line of my script, you can then apply it to a display object or to a bitmap data object. How you apply the filter depends on the object to which you're applying it to. When applying a filter effect to a display object, you'll apply it through the filters property. The filters property of a display object is an array instance whose elements are the filter objects applied to the display object. To apply a single filter to a display object, you'll create a filter instance and then add it to an array instance and then assign that array object to the display object's filters property, as I've done here. There's my object, sphere underscore MC. There's my filters method, and then there's my new array. And the filter that I'm adding to the array is simply the drop shadow filter right there, which has been defined in the line above. If you want to assign multiple filters to an object, which is commonly what you'll want to do, simply add all the filters to the array instance before assigning it to the filters property. You can add multiple objects to an array by passing them as parameters to its constructor. Here's an example where I've added 3 filters to an object here. Ignore the first 4 lines. Let's go over the creating of the various filter instances. Here's first the drop shadow, as I constructed it in the previous example. Then I'm adding another one, the bevel filter, creating a new bevel filter. There's the constructor function right there. Then the blur filter with some parameters that I've filled in there for how the blur will be rendered. Then I'm setting up my array here. Notice that I'm adding 3 filters to the array, drop, shadow, bevel, and blur, that match these names here. And then I'm applying the filters method because this is a display object and not a bitmap. I'm then displaying my display object dot filters equals filters array. Let's go ahead and demonstrate this script by doing a test movie. There's a rectangle that I've rendered with these 4 lines of script up here, and I'm adding a drop shadow and a bevel. The blur is probably the most noticeable of the filters there. If I change these parameters here, let's change this first filter parameter. That's the blur X direction, and then the blur Y direction, and redo this, you'll notice that the rectangle gets very blurry indeed. Let me review quickly the script up here for creating that rectangle. I'm creating it on the fly using a myBitmapData variable here that calls the bitmapData method to create a new bitmap with these properties, 100 pixels by 100 pixels. That's the color of the bitmap. I'm using the bitmap method to bring in the bitmap data here to create this display object. Then I'm adding the display object to the stage with the addChild method. Then the last part of the script here is I'm assigning the filters array to the display object to apply all the filters that I've defined up above. I continue this discussion of scripting display filters in the next movie.